90% of the US adult population have some degree of metabolic dysfunction. Learn to live with these crashes, but there's another way of living. Everyone has a very different reaction to different foods.
Driving increases my blood sugar without food. The body is expecting to move and do activity, and therefore the blood sugar goes up.
It isn't all just about food. Every spike triggers some kind of stress response in the body. Sometimes we can just feel stressed, but we don't really understand why.
Worth checking out at least once in your life to see what's what.
Harry, welcome, my friend. I am recording from a different room today because, to be honest, I've been up there for 2 recordings already for different shows, and it's like a little sweat box in this heat, and I can't tolerate it anymore. So I've come downstairs into my downstairs office where I've got a little bit more light. I've got air conditioning in here if I need it. I've turned it off for the recording. Yeah, I hope you don't mind. I'm in a different space today, but I'm a little bit dark, not as well lit as yours.
I am also in a new room because although it's the same room, I literally had it painted today. So I've got a new color, my Stiff Key Blue Farrow & Ball knockoff color matched, which I think I'm liking it. It feels more like an office and less like a utility room because it is technically a utility room, but it looks good with the wooden desk, which isn't going to stay anyway long term. But I've only been in here for about 10 minutes. So this is hot off the press and it feels good. And I've got the breeze, I've got the trees I'm looking at. So I'm in a very different setup to you, but all very good. So yeah, I'm looking forward to our chat because I want to talk about an experiment I've been running for the last 10, 12, well, probably 12 days along with my mum.
We were going to talk about this last episode, weren't we? But when you were only a few days in and we got sidetracked, as we often do. So you should have a little bit more data to report on this time, I presume.
Yeah. I mean, so for the listeners that don't know what we're talking about, I recently bought a couple of CGM. So CGM stands for continuous glucose monitor. It's a little device that if you're watching us, you could probably see on the back of my arm, a little white device that you use an applicator to press onto your skin and it stays there for around 14 days. It effectively puts a tiny little bit of a metal thing underneath your skin. So it doesn't really pierce you all the way through. You don't really feel it when it goes in. I did it for myself and for my mum. You barely feel it. It's like a little tiny scratch, if that. And it links up via Bluetooth, which obviously I'm not super a fan of having Bluetooth connected, but for 2 weeks it's okay. And you get an app and it will show you your blood glucose in effectively real time. Even if you're not with your phone, it will store it on the device. Then next time you sync up with your phone, it'll maintain it. And yeah, I think it's really interesting to talk about blood glucose because my mum is pre-diabetic. So I was trying to look at really, for me, showing her in real time what certain things were doing. Like when she has a problem where she eats and then she is hungry again. I'm like, well, that's because you're eating the wrong foods, right? So she'll have cornflakes for breakfast and then be hungry later and have Philadelphia on toast and then still be wanting to eat more. And I'm trying to show her just how much that affects her blood glucose and explain to her as well why that's an issue and why that's important and what insulin does and all of that. So yeah, I thought it would be interesting to talk about blood glucose, why it's a thing, what is it?
I did the monitoring myself about a year ago. Tim Spector, you get them with his kits that he sends out. I can't remember what it's called, the brand is now. It's interesting. I found it interesting because I was obviously going quite heavily into my training at the time. Actually, it's on my desk here. I've got a glucose monitor and I've got a few little monitors. I try different things. I haven't used it for a little while, but I think also for our listeners, being the mindful past, like it's not just a diabetes story. When we look at glucose monitoring, it's a mindfulness story, right? It's, that every spike that you have or every crash that you have has an impact on your cortisol, has an impact on your adrenaline, our stress levels. And I think it's not just the energy. I know you mentioned that with your mum and the cravings. It's also like learning how to notice what food makes you feel better or makes you feel good, what gives you more bodily awareness. Because it's not just about nutrition. It links to stress. It links to cortisol.
Well, actually, I think that's a good point. Let me dial it back a bit for like that listener who has got absolutely no idea what we're talking about, right? And so the body, when it eats food, uses that food for a number of things. One is fuel, but actually also creating new cells in the body and actually becomes your body. This is something I didn't really recognize until maybe 10 years ago, that our cells are obviously continually destroying and being rebuilt, but they're being rebuilt with the foods. The food that you're eating is literally the building blocks for your new body. So if you eat stuff laden with chemicals and plastics, your body's being built up with that. But we also use it for fuel. And so that fuel is in various forms, but one form is going to be glucose, like blood sugar, or a sugar that is used. And so we need that, right? Because that's going to fuel us. And actually, a few things that are quite interesting. So you have a range that you might be between. And the idea is that your wave or your peaks and troughs are quite smooth as opposed to jagged and high. You want them reasonably steady. And actually, I remember I was talking to someone the other day about our cycle rides and how I often, even back then, because I remember reading, I can't remember, it was a book. I think the runner was Steve someone or other, but he ran across America and he was doing it basically fueled by fat. Now, traditionally, when with marathons and things like that, it's always this carb loading, eat pasta the night before and all that. I've not been of that school of thought for about 15 years. I'm much more of the school of thought of fuel with fat. And so when we used to do our cycle trips, I used to focus on that to try and keep a sustained energy. I remember, I think it was like Moo is a classic example, who was basically carbing up and down, where he was having those gels, which give you that super spike and then that crash. And
it's the crash,
I only ever did like carbohydrate as a spike if we were going up a hill. We knew we had a 10-minute hill or 20-minute hill. And then I would do something there because it would get the fuel into the blood and into the cells much quicker, but I wouldn't have as much of a crash because I already had a sustained level of fat deposits.
Yeah, I mean, we'll end up going off on as we often do, off-piste a little bit. I think when people go on marathons, they hit the wall, in inverted commas. I've hit the wall. That's usually or often when your body starts utilizing fat for energy instead of the easily accessible carbohydrates. When we run out of our carbohydrate stores, the easily accessible energy. And we're not that efficient at burning fat for fuel.
Unless you train it.
Unless you train it, but most people for stone. But even if you do train it, there's still more calorific. So it's still harder, but you can train for it. I think the point is, I mean, carb loading, there's a lot in it. I've obviously done a lot of endurance-based events. If you carb load correctly, it's really good to fuel the muscles and fill the muscles. I think you can obviously do it on fats, but it's just worth understanding it's not a straight swap. As you said, you have to train these things. Your body is not stores fat first, as it almost is horrible, and will burn off the easily accessible energy and the glucose first. What I think is interesting on the glucose monitoring stuff is your friend that you met, I think it was Chastity you met, was it Rangan Chastity you met? You got the picture.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so when in his book and on his podcast, he talks about how 90% of the US adult population have some degree of metabolic dysfunction.
Yeah.
An abnormality in how they process food and energy. And I think when you look at things like this, glucose monitoring, make the invisible visible, right? You see inside your body, you start to see these waves that you talk about. And you can start to get to grips with whether some of the foods you're eating are helping you in the way that we think that they are, and whether they are causing those crashes. You know, sometimes we might blame it on something else, or we may not always understand it. We learn to live with these crashes, but there's another way of living. It's like always living tired and suddenly a good night's sleep. You know, oh my God, why didn't I sleep earlier? You know, I could feel like this every day. We don't always know. We've got to make the visible visible. I think that's where this monitoring could be quite interesting.
Yeah,
well.
When we talk about, and I think going back to what you said maybe 5-10 minutes ago about having that mindful approach and noticing things, what I found interesting about this is that I'm very mindful about how things interact with my body. For example, I've said many times, I think on this podcast before, that I try not to have sugar after 4-5 o'clock because I know it's going to affect my sleep. But there are some weird things that have happened with this reading that I think it's worth just sharing.
I definitely want to get into it. I think it's just key to let our listeners know it's not just about food eating habits. This is holistic. It links to
this is what I will get
well-being and everything else.
Yeah, this is what I will get to, because just rewinding a little bit. So let's say you have a band, a number, I think it's like 3.8 to 7.8, where you want your blood sugar to remain for most people. This particular app will measure what they call lingo points. So I'm using one, no affiliation with something called Lingo. I think the NHS version is Libra, which they give out to.
That's the one I use, the Libra one. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So it's the same brand. It's by a company called ABBA. But anyway, they give you certain lingo points. So if it spikes and you've eaten, then you get the points. But if it spikes and then you move, it doesn't count towards your total for the day or whatever. But you want to be between this kind of upper and lower limit effectively without going too high or too fast or anything like that. And what happens, and I'm going to explain, I know you already know, Nick, but I've explained it to listeners because I was trying to explain to my mum why this is an issue. Because she would see, for example, her blood sugar would go up when she had cornflakes and it would go past her threshold and then it would come down a little bit later. But she was like, so what's the big deal? It's going up, it comes back down and anything like that. And so I've tried to create a little bit of a metaphor and analogy because I like that. So the way I'm going to describe it to listeners is imagine you've got a factory full of workers and their job is simply to put these boxes into lockers, right? You've got lockers all around the room. Their job is simply put boxes into lockers. And in our analogy, the workers are insulin, okay? And the boxes are sugar and the lockers are cells. So effectively, insulin's job is to put the sugar, the fuel, into the cells. And so if you give it a lot of sugar, you need a lot of insulin, a lot of workers to then put that into the lockers in the right time. Now, when you're living your normal life and you put a lot of sugar in, you might not notice it so much because what will happen is your factory workers, they see all the work coming in and they want to tease you. So they work really hard and they get it all into the lockers, no problem. But they're kind of exhausted afterwards. They need a bit of a rest. And then the next day or the next hour, you give them loads more boxes to put into the lockers and they kind of do that again and again. And over time, either the factory workers get tired and less efficient, or they just go on strike and they say, look, working conditions are not right. And what we really want to do is, yes, give them those boxes, but give them those boxes in a more measured way so they can put them into the lockers. You don't need as much staff and all of that. And what happens for a lot of people who get insulin resistance or diabetes is their workers are just basically either going on strike or giving up. And so we want to make sure that even though you might not notice anything because your workers are working okay at the moment, but they're working to extremes and you don't want them to do that really. So that's the main thing. And so now the thing is that you and I can eat the same food. So I did this with my mum and we had some ice cream late last Monday night when we were at some theatre event. She only had maybe 3 spoonfuls and I had the entire rest of the tub. We both spiked, but hers spiked much higher and lasted a lot longer than mine did because her workers were more knackered than mine through more years of abuse, really. So it's quite interesting that same foods, different people obviously will affect you. But a couple of big realizations I had. One, driving. I don't know if you noticed this at all when you had yours, but driving increases my blood sugar without food.
Well, driving for me, as you know, not the best case point for this because as you know, I have a central reservation full of pick a mix and I cannot drive and not eat at the same time. When I'm driving, I am constantly gorging on pick a mix, which is Sugar Crush, Spike, and it's habit more than anything else. I don't enjoy driving, as you know, it makes it more tolerable. And I look forward to it. So I'm probably always driving on a sugar spike.
Okay.
You have a sweet tooth to driving. I'm a bad example of that.
This is without anything though. Mine spikes without anything. And I didn't understand that at the beginning. Now I think I understand why. Even though I wasn't stressed, it was a nice day, whatever, I don't feel stressed in the car. Yeah. I think inherently driving is a stressful activity, even if you don't feel stressed, because what your body is doing is it's going into hyper focus to see to danger, be observant. Very much like when you're going on a hunt or very much like when you're being attacked by a lion or a tiger. And therefore you enter a form of fight or flight, even if you don't realize it. And the body is expecting to move and do activity. And therefore the blood sugar goes up. And that's why my blood sugar, I think, rises when I drive. And more importantly, one of the things I think I'm going to start doing going forward, I went for food at a friend's place the other day and it was reasonably healthy. I was kind of testing the data, but I did have rice. It was dal and rice and then some avocado, which is fat. And it did go up. But interestingly enough, I had to go and do some errands after that. And I was in the car for about an hour and a half. And because I didn't have time to move the body, it just stayed up for 3 hours, whereas normally it would have gone down again. So one of the things I think I'm going to do going forward is if I ever stop at a service station and eat, which I sometimes do, especially when I do the Brighton London run, is just walk around the car park for 5-10 minutes before going into the car.
I did the reason book way, but I remember there being like a 2-hour march. Start coming down. If it stays hiking for over 2 hours, that's overstressing. I don't know if that's still the case in the one you're doing. I do remember though, he has you follow his app. I don't know what it's called now, you'll know. He's got an app as me that people were doing. It was a big craze for a while. Yeah. What's his? Zoe.
Which one? Tim Spector.
And I was part of the Zoe. You could sign up for the extra, study piece. And I was in the Zoe study. But I remember in there, he used to get the updates. And I remember you'll know this already. So it could be that your mum's always been eating that wrong differently. And that's why it's high and yours come down. But also, you learn that everyone has a very different reaction to different foods. So we're not all the same. So you could have that same experiment with completely different foods and actually yours goes up and hers comes down because it's very personalized, very individual. And that's where these things can be really useful. So you can kind of discover whether it is, what foods are really keeping you heightened and which are coming down smoother. And you won't really know that without personal testing, either with feel, maybe. But I know Tim Spector was talking about his breakfast. So he used to think he was eating really healthy every morning. He had like low-fat milk, yogurt, muesli, those kinds of foods. And he discovered they were the things actually draining his energy, right? So he ended up swapping over to bananas, I think it was apples or whatever it was. But he changed his diet. Arguably, he would argue from what people would perceive to be healthy to healthy, but they had dramatically different impacts on his body. Now, you and I might challenge whether the first star of muesli, milk, and whatever is healthy in the first place, but he was able to experiment to change those spikes. But for somebody else, it may have a completely different impact. So I think it's interesting to know how those foods do impact you differently.
Well, I mean, I think also what's good about it, and I was trying to tell my mum, is that this 2-week period that it lasts for is a perfect time to try lots of things. So this is my excuse to why I went out earlier, and I went out around 3:00 and went and got this chocolate ice cream, homemade ice cream that they do, like a vegan chocolate ice cream from a place called Morocco's near me. I had that because I was like, okay, I'm going to have that in isolation and see. And then actually about 10 minutes later, 15 minutes later, I went to this health food shop and bought this chocolate bar that I sometimes on occasion buy, maybe once every few months, but it's a big amount. And I am shocked that my blood sugar has not risen because I've had around 60, well, the chocolate bar alone was probably 60 grams of sugar. Bear in mind your daily limit should be 22. So I've had 60 plus the ice cream, God knows how much. However, I decided to go for a walk, and actually I want to come on to strategies in a minute about limiting blood sugar. I decided to go for a walk, only 10 minutes, 15 minutes. I'm still waiting for the blood sugar to go up. It's been flat the whole time. So it might go up when we're on call now because I'm not moving my body so much. But the sheer fact of moving, and not like intense movement, because intense movement will activate it and make it go higher, but just a walk has kept that blood sugar, even though I've had copious amounts of sugar, at bay, which is phenomenal.
This is stuff our listeners, maybe they don't know. Maybe sometimes you assume they know things.
No, let's assume our listener doesn't know anything. So
big things is like fruit juice, right? And you'll know this. I did some of my nutrition courses and you'll know this already. But you have fruit juice in the morning, and fruit juice is one of the things that will absolutely 9 out of 10 really spike your blood sugar, right? Because it's full of fructose and it might be full of 6 oranges. It's very different drinking that very quickly and getting it down than eating 6 oranges. When you take out all the fibrous of the orange, which are actually there to help slow down the sugar release, it spikes. And you could argue, well, I'm eating the same foods. You are, but it's the fiber you're removing from the fruit juice that actually helps slow your blood sugar. So a lot of things, sometimes I think we do things, we think we're doing healthy things, and actually we're sometimes we're not almost. It's like, well, fruit juice is better than Coke or whatever, but it's understanding what's behind it. If you remove all the fibrous material that slows it down, it's,
well, yeah,
and that's like your walk after meals. It's going to soften the glucose response, right? It's like a mindful reset.
Well, firstly, the fruit juice, the issue with that is we watch movies, and on movies they have, someone will say, I made you a healthy breakfast, and they'll have the fruit juice and all this, that. Even I was seeing an advert today for, I think it was a former women's football person sponsored by Colgate to advertise Colgate. They're brushing their tooth, not with an electric toothbrush, but with a normal toothbrush. But they're brushing it in the way that my dentist has never to brush it. So, and when you watch a movie, they're kind of like rubbing it vigorously against their teeth. And my dentist said when you're not got an electric toothbrush, you should just be like scooping with the other brush. You shouldn't be like ever doing that.
I think we saw a stand-up comedian who said never ever buy the toothpaste that the dentists recommend. Like, we're keeping them in business. Like, if you see one that says 95% of dentists agree, that's the one you want to avoid.
Yeah,
because you're keeping all the dentists in business, right? So
yeah, when it comes to toothpaste, actually, I don't know, maybe it's a different conversation, but I've started the last maybe 4 years buying, I haven't bought toothpaste with fluoride in for many years, but instead of fluoride, there's a compound which actually your teeth are made of called hydroxyapatite. And so we want to look for toothpaste with hydroxyapatite, it's called, and that will actually remineralize your teeth, supposedly. So that's a separate conversation. But some of the other interesting things I found with the monitoring, and I understand that a lot of people listening, they may not do well with monitoring anyway. But like we've said before, right, Peter Drucker says, you can't manage with their measure. So I think it's useful for people to do once a year or something like that. But if you're a bit kind of OCD with it, then maybe stay away from it. But certain things I've enjoyed from doing this is that it gives me an excuse to do certain things. So I was working last week or the week before, and there was nothing really I could eat. So I went to the co-op and I decided to buy a croissant. That did a massive spike, as you'd expect. And then some of these like Walker's crisps, like Copper flavor kind of crisps, massive spike with that. I wasn't too bothered because I knew that I was going to be on my feet all afternoon in front of students. But that was interesting. Like I said, the driving was interesting. Another time at a school, I had just a jacket potato, no butter, no nothing on it, except for I had some, I guess, boiled
Proper school meal.
carrots and broccoli.
Okay.
A huge spike. So that's quite interesting. But interestingly, some of the chocolates that I tend to eat regularly, like I had an on-bar chocolate on Saturday, really late, maybe 8 o'clock, whereas I was staying up for the football. And so I was quite happy with the sugar rush, but it didn't
I was about to say,
spike.
that's the other hidden one, is like
Nor did the
cider,
beer that I had.
lager, wine, the sugars in those. I think the recommendation I would take away, I'll give an example of one of the things I discovered. Has it changed? Or two things have changed eating habits a little bit. The first is the fruit juice one had an impact on me. I didn't learn that through the glucose monitor, I learned that through my nutrition studies, but I just stopped drinking it. You know, I'll have it now and again if I'm at a hotel breakfast, but otherwise I don't buy it for the house. It's never in the house. I don't buy those things. So that's made a shift. And if I do, I make my own juices. I'll do it with like ginger and other bits, but I'll try not to strip all the good stuff out and try and keep the fiber in. So that's something. But one thing, what I do remember, this is when I was doing my Ironman training. So I'd have been on the bike doing 3-4 hour sessions before work. So I'd be getting up on the bike 5 o'clock, 5:30, doing a 3 hour session. And you need to fuel well. And I used to fuel always with toast because it's a standard thing. You wake up, you make coffee, and you make toast, caffeine, whatever. And I was glucose monitoring. I moved over to porridge and oats. Now, arguably both are carbs, which aren't great, you know, but they're slow release carbs, probably more on the oats than they are on the white bread, maybe. But I knew it didn't bother me because I knew I was going to be on the bike for 3 hours. Kind of feel that you get into the mode, you can eat whatever you want to a certain degree. You're not going to store it, it's going to be burnt off. But my spike was way higher with the white bread toast than it was with the flapjacks. And some of these weren't I'm not just talking about porridge. I was making porridge, I was making flapjacks and making things like that. But it never really got over the dangerous spike for me with oats. Even if I was like dousing them in honey, flapjacks and stuff, I never went over the line, but it was sustained for ages. So now when I do my long races, that's the kind of food I take with me because I know it won't take me so far that I'll crash, but it'll keep me sustained for ages. Whereas white bread would take me straight over and it would instantly come straight back down.
I mean, it's basically like injecting sugar into your system before I'm trying to tell mum, I'm trying to move her away from like the pasta. So I made a carbonara the other day, but it's a vegan carbonara. So I make the sauce using cashew nuts and coconut milk. And then we had, I think, instead of bacon, some tofu, have some mushrooms, whatever. But importantly, the pasta was lentil pasta, but lentil is the entire ingredient. So there's nothing else other than lentil in. That kept things reasonably flat. Yesterday, I make a stir fry quite often, and I tend to have rice noodles, which I know the rice noodles is going to spike it. It went up quite a lot yesterday, but then I was thinking I did have effectively 3 people's portions in one go. So I'm debating that I think I need to massively have my spikes are always later in the day as well, because at the beginning of the day, I tend to have the smoothie and the juice, and I have a vegetable juice. So it's not very, and that doesn't spike me. The smoothie and the juices don't spike me, but all my sugar spikes are towards the end of the day. However, I'm trying to move my mum away from, basically we're trying to do some simple swap outs. So instead of, the toast, she wants toast, but I'm going to try and experiment her with maybe rye bread or sourdough bread, even my
lentils one's interesting. I have to find it. So I did one of my nutritional courses was on natural health nutrition. We're going back a decade. I've got the notes all in my files upstairs. But I do remember, it's all I may have mentioned on the show before, it's always stuck with me. There was, you could reverse, which is the diabetes you can reverse. One of them is type 2.
Well, I mean, type 2, there's a show called Simply Raw that I recommend people watch, where supposedly someone reversed their type 1, but that's
so I think maybe it was type 2. But the study that I read only came to mind because they were talking about blood sugar, which was very closely, glucose monitoring is obviously very closely linked to those that are on diabetes, and we want to try and prevent diabetes, which can be more preventable if we're not always spiking our body all the time with sugars and making ourselves work harder. They do an analogy on metabolic used earlier. But I do remember reading a study in there, which I had to write a paper on it. I had to find it because this was, I say, about 10 years ago, around diets full of a bean-based diet. So that can include lentils, pulses, anything that kind of creates life, but in grain or pulse or bean form, was able to completely reverse people that were suffering with type 2 diabetes. I thought it was interesting because you mentioned the lentils thing. I'll have to try and find, I was just put it on GPT now so if I can find the study, because we're going back a long time ago. But I've definitely got it in my notes. And I remember saying it to you. I've got my father-in-law has diabetes and my type 2 and my brother-in-law has type 1. Just saying, look, if it helps, you might just want to have more, those little decisions you make. You're not sure what to have for dinner and you're at a buffet. Take the beans, not the pasta, just sensible choices.
Yeah, that's the thing I'm trying to... So I've created some visual charts for my mum to put on the fridge of certain swap outs. Now, they're not necessarily perfect swap outs, but for example, it might say from white rice to whole grain rice. Now, whole grain rice has got issues in other ways, and some people will say actually white rice is better than brown rice. But let's think about it for purely one aspect, one-dimensional blood sugar. We haven't tested it yet, but I imagine it should be better. Then instead of that entirely, maybe we're choosing buckwheat or maybe we're choosing quinoa. And so, quinoa is basically, I think it's a complete protein. So that should, satisfy a protein need, but also it's quite light. So you can get quite full. You don't feel too bloated from it or tired. So that might be a nice swap out. Instead of pasta, moving to lentil pasta. A few things like that I've created some swap outs for her. Instead of its normal bread, either the rye bread, the sourdough bread, or something else. Gluten-free bread, interestingly, is obviously fully massively processed. I've been experimenting with the gluten-free bread that I normally have, and I haven't noticed. So the other day I had it with an entire tub of hummus, though, like 200 grams, entire tub of Sainsbury's hummus, no spike whatsoever. Then the day after, I had 4 slices of pita bread, but I had a 4-egg omelette with peppers, spinach, onion, no spike whatsoever, stayed full for 8 hours, like totally fine. So it's really interesting.
Yeah,
so
yeah,
I think, have you heard of the glucose
She's done a
goddess?
book. It's in our
Finance. Well, yes, I bought the book, but my mum insisted I returned it. I bought the recipe book rather than
it's the recipe one we've got.
book. But she insisted she wasn't. I actually bought it, and the next day I was at my friend's house, and her mum, who's got one of these devices as well, she actually had it on her coffee table. But my mum insisted that she wasn't going to look at it, and so I've returned it. But she has got this Channel 4 show, which I do recommend people watch because it's going to explain things in quite simple terms, called Eat Smart. You can watch it on Channel 4 Player, and it's a 2-part one, maybe an hour each episode. She takes people through a bit of a journey. And she's got some very simple swap outs. I've heard her on Diary of a CEO, I think many years ago, and a few other podcasts. But one of them is the order in which you eat your food. And this is what I like, is that it's not changing the kind of food you're eating. Eat what you're normally going to eat, but make sure you do effectively the fiber/vegetables first, then the proteins, then the fats, or protein fats, let's say, probably much less, but carbohydrates last. That will do a massive amount for your blood sugar, as will, she says, wrap in your carbohydrates in vegetables, like creating a blanket, which is, again, what I've been saying to people for a long time in my Panlo 80/20, is that make most of your visual plate that fibrous vegetable side. You say thing.
If you eat the fiber and protein first, means you're fuller quicker. So if you are going to leave anything on the plate, you're leaving the carbohydrate.
So actually, one of the things I've been using the last year, which I was kind of against for a long time, I've found them quite useful when I'm in a pinch. And I'm sure you would have heard of them as well. Those Huel drinks. Yeah. I'm not really a biggest fan of that necessarily, but they sometimes have vending machines at airports and other places. And I find them quite useful in a pinch. I had one of those the other day to test the numbers, and I always feel reasonably full on it, but in a weird kind of full way because it's like protein full.
I found when I was looking, I said it was about a
spikes
decade ago.
either.
Apparently, it was from a study, and it says GBT says, I think you're remembering a 2012 randomized trial with 121. It's a relatively small study with type 2 diabetes. It could well be this. They can't find anything else. I'm guessing this is the study that I looked at because I said it was about a decade ago, 14 years ago. It was a while ago. But it says participants were encouraged to eat at least 1 cup of beans, chickpeas, or lentils daily as part of a low glycemic index diet. After 3 months, their HbA1c fell by 0.5 percentage points compared with 0.3 on a high wheat fiber diet, which was being recommended at the time. Blood pressure also improved. The difference attributable to the bean-based diet was approximately 0.2 percentage points compared with the control diet that was being recommended at the time. So I thought that was good. That was, it showed improvements in fasting glucose from regular regimes. What they said at the end is, obviously type 2 diabetes can achieve remission. It's usually associated with not just beans, it's associated with an overall dietary and lifestyle program, which is fair enough. What it does say, though, just to give our listeners something to think about, especially if you've just been diagnosed or you're worried about type 2 diabetes, a sensible approach would be to replace some refined carbohydrates or processed meat with half to a cup of beans, chickpeas, or lentils most days. And that's a pretty easy swap out. You're talking about swapping things over. It does say increase gradually to avoid bloating, but even if you're getting full, you're going to eat less. Beans still do contain carbohydrates, so portions and total calorie intake do matter. But even so, I'm pretty sure that must have been the study because I can't find anything else.
I mean, yeah, with things like beans, lentils, etc., it is dependent on the thing you're having, and also it depends on how you prepare them. Whether you use things like pressure cookers, soak them, all these sorts of things to get rid of, I guess, the.
I just remember my courses with the two biggest bits of advice. Once I've shared many times in this course, which is trying to have 5 different colours on the plate, because each colour represents a different nutritional value.
Yeah,
and fill your plate with things that give
spice
life.
of life, as they say. So I think actually, for people with type 2 diabetes, one of the things actually, I don't know if you know this or not, but that got me into talking about health and well-being. So when I started 15 years ago, I guess, I talk about it in Super Vitality, but I went on a personal development course. I went to this course all about law of attraction, but on the last day he was talking about health and brought all these people on. But some of the things that I learned through that journey, it wasn't just on that course, it was through interacting with lots of people, was that we'd effectively been lied to about certain diseases, longevity, aging, and so on. One of which was about heart disease, right? That you've got heart disease, you can't reverse it. That's not true. But also type 2 diabetes, right? Up until probably 15 years ago, I thought type 2 diabetes was, you're kind of done with that. But it is reversible. I don't know if I like the word remission but I guess it means, okay, you're in remission, but if you do the things that got you in there in the first place, you're going to go back to it. But effectively, you're curing it. You're not diabetic because it's a measure of blood sugar. But there was a good documentary I do recommend people watch if they are interested. It's years old, maybe 15 years old, called Simply Raw. And in that documentary, they took only 6 people. I think maybe 4 had type 2 and 2 had type 1. Type 1 diabetes is generally the one you're born with. The reasons are a little bit unclear as to how you get it. It might be to do with the mother and whatever else. But anyway, they took them on a raw food diet. It must have been, hence the title Simply Raw. But those with type 2 diabetes, I think fully reversed it. But there was one guy who I think he believed he had type 2, but then it turned out he had type 1 and reversed it. So don't quote me on that. But the other guy who had type 1 diabetes, who cheated during that 30-day experiment.
I mean, it's a small study already, right? There's only 6
Tijuana
people.
To go and drink.
It's like 15% cheated.
Yes, but he still cheated on his study, right? Because he was not doing the thing he should be doing. He kind of went and had alcohol. He still went from like 25 units of insulin a day down to 5 or something like that. So the point is there's usually a way around that. So I think if you are even if you're not someone that is suffering with pre-diabetes or diabetes, understanding the blood sugar thing is really interesting. And also what you can do. So for example, like I said before, I've had this massive amount of sugar, but going for a 15-minute walk after you eat dampens the effect. Or even if you can't go for a walk, I was saying this to my mum, when you're sitting watching TV, just do heel raises, activate your calf muscles, clench your hands together. Anything that effectively mimics the body into this idea that it's got to use muscles will dampen the blood sugar response. So that's one thing. The other thing I'm going to test, and I bought some today, I don't know if you do it yet.
I used to have it every morning.
Apple cider
I used
vinegar.
to have a pint of water. So I've got a bit lazy recently, but literally religiously every morning I would have a pint of water, which was full of apple cider vinegar, electrolytes, creatine, collagen, and then I have my B6, B12, little sort of CG1 kind of, or AG1 it's called, kind of mix. I whack it all into one and then take it all down. I know you're not supposed to, let's just layer everything in one go, but it was just like a morning thing of like super water. And I don't drink water, as you know, so it was like a way of getting everything in, take it early. It didn't taste very good, I'll be honest. I know there's lots of big benefits, so I was kind of like, I'll give it a go.
Yeah, I think I'm going to just book some apple cider vinegar today. I know that my dad, when he was diagnosed with diabetes, the other thing actually is worth mentioning to people listening, especially if it's someone who's on statins, which I know a lot of people might be listening, is statins. And I told this to my dad, he only developed diabetes after going on statins. And I looked into it, and statins do increase the risk of diabetes. So that is, and also now that's probably why my mum, she's on statins and is now pre-diabetic. But so if you're on statins, which again is another discussion as to
I agree.
whether there's any real value in that. certain people. I mean, actually, I was talking to my friend the other day who lives in America, the one that I tried to connect you with. He stopped taking it. He's a doctor, but he stopped taking his statins. But I was saying to him, look, you are actually the one user case where statins do seem to be beneficial, because statins really, the data only shows that they are really beneficial for you if you've already had a heart attack, not if you've not had a heart attack. So he's already had a heart attack before, I think once or twice. And so I'm like, you probably should be on statins. And it's like, you wouldn't normally hear me like say that, but you probably should be on statins. But anyway, statins make you more likely to be diabetic, I guess, is the thing. But so I think apple cider vinegar is something to test to see with the same food, does it dampen things? The other thing that the glucose goddess says, so some of the techniques she says is, yes, you have your fiber and, plants first, then your proteins, then your fats, then your carbohydrates. Walk 15 minutes afterwards, or even just before you do those things, drinking your apple cider vinegar, I think either side of the meal, but definitely 30 minutes before. But they're basic things, which everyone could do, I think.
Yeah.
And
it
will make a big difference,
gains, isn't it? I mean, the apple cider vinegar, I think, had it's relatively limited evidence, but I did it anyway. I don't have a huge amount of evidence to support it, but sometimes it's like all these changes. It's a bit like you can see the evidence in the device. Well, I think that's why all these devices are good. They're good for curiosity. They're good for seeing what you can't see.
Yeah. Have the same meal 2 days in a row, once with apple cider vinegar, once without, and see what happens.
I think also, and we say this all the time, whatever your food beliefs are, whether vegetarian, vegan, or you eat everything, it's a bit like you can make smarter choices. So you talked about carbohydrates going from lentils. There's still carbohydrates in beans and lentils, but there's also loads of other minerals and nutrients and proteins and things within those other foods. So sometimes it's not about trying to avoid, I don't personally agree with trying to avoid an entire, carbs, fats, proteins. You shouldn't eliminate, they're all important for the body, but you can make sensible choices. If you want to have fruit juice, try and eat an orange instead of extracting all the goodness out of it and drinking the juice straight out of water and eating orange. There's just little things you can switch around that just improve things. And as you say, if you get a GCM monitor, you can monitor how it actually impacts the body.
And the other thing is, it's important to remember is, what is it you're doing 90% of the time? Now, orange juice, I don't know that we ever really bought it since childhood, because I think...
Remember Sunny Delight? Oh my God.
We didn't necessarily agree with it.
Pure sugar. I remember that stuff.
No, we would never. My parents, interestingly enough, the only thing I can remember in our pantry or freezer or anywhere that was quote unquote processed, and it's only marginally processed, would be things like, which I never ate anyway, baked beans, that'd be something in a can, and then fish fingers. That's the only two things I can think of that we ever had. We would never, ever allowed, what are they called? Are they called like Ribena cordials, all those things?
My baked beans is
parents never allowed those.
I don't think I've ever had them. I'd still bake. I'd my baked beans.
Yeah, no, I'm not saying it's not. I'm just saying that I remember there being very limited items in packets and whatnot. And we ate really, really well, because obviously my dad loved cooking. It was his kind of happy place, but he wasn't always like that. When he moved to the UK at 18, he ate, I think, to 6 months straight at this cafe in King's Cross Station. He showed me where it was once, and he just ate fry-ups, the classic English fry-up, and got really dodgy and ill. And the doctor was like, "Dude, no."
It was on a paleo diet. That's what it was. Paleos.
It wasn't really paleo, because Paleolithic people did not have fry-ups.
I'm giving him some bandwidth, right? He's not here to defend himself.
What was good is that his sister basically got him cooking in a kind of stealth way by asking him to do certain things when she went out and about. So he learned to cook, and it was his happy place, and he used to cook maybe 85% of our meals, and then the other 50% my gran would cook.
Yeah, I remember your dad being a great cook. He cooked some good things for me back in the day.
Yeah, exactly. So I think, cooking is a skill that is just so important that is lost. I don't know that even in schools they do my home economics. My niece is learning stuff about food at the moment, but it's so important to understand. Even little things like, I think we've talked about on the show before, like when you look at a packet, that the ingredients in order is how much is in there, but how they disguise sugar. And I talk about this in Super Vitality. I think I give maybe 50 different names for sugar. And you'll often see 6 of those in that. Whereas if they just said sugar, it would be number 1 on the list. But now it's number 2, number 6, number 5, number whatever.
Yeah, it's like all the 0% fat yogurts and things you can buy, right? And it's just,
Well, yeah, if you take out the fat, then you add in something else, right, as a percentage, which is generally sugar. So you want,
which then gets converted into fat in the body once it's stored. So it's like
yes, if you can't use the glucose and the carbohydrates, it gets stored in the liver as well. And that's really helpful.
and there's usually way more of it than the fat. Like you're often much better going for the full fat version.
Yeah. But I guess the point I was going to say with the orange juice was that occasionally I will have orange juice. Even the other day, I think, not the other day, but maybe about a month ago, I had a can of Coke or whatever it might be, which I probably have maybe 3 or 4 a year. I'm not doing it with guilt. And we talk about this all the time on the show about like doing things with awareness. And so I think you really have to understand what kind of person you are. I'm someone that will track things and I'm into that app every day, adding my things, but I'm not obsessive to the point of neurotic about it or saying that I can't do a certain thing because of blah, blah, blah. So I think you really need to understand the kind of person you are before you venture into this world, because it could be a really bad thing as well for you.
I think though, this constant monitoring and checking is just, okay, maybe you do this for 2 weeks and you try something else. It's having awareness all year round of trying to maximize and optimize what we eat and what we consume. I think most people go through life without even questioning it. They just eat what they've always eaten. They buy what they've always bought. They don't even notice that actually the companies that the baked beans now will be different to the baked beans 10 years ago in the way they're produced. There'll be the cost savings somewhere. And it just gives us an opportunity to have awareness. Like I get frustrated sometimes when I watch some of these documentaries and they'll make a statement like, I don't know, and you can challenge me here, vegans have way less heart diseases or whatever it is. That may be true, but also they're already 99% more aware of what they're eating than the rest of the population that are just eat everything. Because you already have made a choice to be more food conscious, more food aware and what you're putting in your body. Same if you're anything. If I'm an athlete, I'm more consciously aware of what I'm fueling my body with than someone who's a non-athlete. So I think it's just a good thing. Like having this monitoring you're doing is making you test. It's feeding your curiosity for what is good and what isn't good. It's making you test what works in the body, and hopefully you'll end up healthier and have more awareness and more knowledge at the end of it, right?
I think it is making me think a little bit more about something. I am very surprised. I'm still very surprised the amount of sugar I've had today and it not have the effect I thought it was. Now, it still has effect on my sleep because I know that my deep sleep tends to be a lot less when I have sugar later on in the day. So so just because one thing is not that bad, it doesn't mean that it's not going to affect me elsewhere. But I think having the awareness is, super, super important to me as an individual. It doesn't mean that I'm always going to then follow the best course of action. But I think what's interesting is that like I said before, if I stop at a service station and have food now, I think I'm more likely to decide, let me just go for a 5-minute walk around the car park before I get into the car for the next 2 hours. The other thing that I would try to experiment with coming down from London the other day, and I don't think I did it enough, was breathe. No, actually, this is what I was doing. I wasn't breathing. Obviously I was breathing, but in order to reduce my stress in the car, I was humming a lot.
Vagus nerve.
Listeners may or may not know that humming, vagus nerve, stimulator of vagus nerves when you hum, but also when you sing, or sometimes because you're on the motorway, no one can hear you effectively scream. So I'd be doing things like that, right? And I think, look at the graph, it's lower and flatter than it was in a shorter drive. So I think knowing that when I'm in my car by myself, I'm more likely to do things like humming, screaming, singing.
And actually, there's something else in that. You're probably more likely just to laugh at yourself as well. Doing that. I laugh when you make laugh. And suddenly we laugh at ourselves, and laughter is a great thing for bringing down confidence.
Actually, no, the other thing I did in the car, I recently discovered, I knew it was in there all the time, but I just applied it, was the cruise control feature. So I set it at, say, 70 miles an hour and it automatically brakes if there's a car in front of you. So it's very lazy driving. But what it did allow me to do is it freed up both my legs to then do calf races and things like that in the car. So I was doing that whilst driving. So I think it was...
Only you, Harry. Only you.
Yeah, only me. But I like to do these little quirky things. So I think that's really interesting. And even today I did 20 push-ups and 20 squats just to get to the wall for the push-ups after I had the ice cream and the chocolate, which may also have contributed to it not being as spiky. So I think little things like that, I think I'm going to be a bit more mindful of going forwards and try to do that. Yeah, I would say to listeners who are curious, it's worth knowing maybe once a year. I'm looking forward.
Makes the invisible visible. That's the thing.
Yeah, and I'm looking forward to when they can add some sort of CGM reader into wearable technology that's not invasive. And even better, if you're someone will get a little bit stressed by looking at things all the time, like we said, not monitor all the time. But what I'd say, once the device can actually call out to you and say, hey, you haven't really looked at your blood sugar for a few days, but I've noticed that when you do this, it's rising. What's going on? I think that'd be more useful than constantly looking at it.
As reminding people, like, this isn't all just about food. Every spike triggers some kind of stress response in the body, right? And
yes, an exercise will spike it, but that's a good thing because you need the glucose to fuel it. But stress, such as driving or whatever, will also spike it because it leaves you playing into fight.
Sometimes we can just feel stressed. We don't really understand why. And sometimes you realize you've been to McDonald's 3 hours before, you've eaten something, and you're just feeling a bit low and a bit, maybe there's nothing's actually happened by what you've eaten, literally.
So anyway, interesting. I would say worth checking out at least once in your life to see what's what, if you're not so inclined.
CGM monitoring. There you go.
Yeah, I can see myself doing it like once or twice a year, actually. I'm more conscious.
We'll have to share your final results when you finish your full assessment. I'm sure there'll be some more to share next week.
Yeah, we'll see. Well, I'm trying buckwheat noodles for dinner tonight instead of rice noodles. See if that makes a difference.
Let me know how you get on. Good stuff. All right, buddy. Good to see you. As always, sorry for the slightly darker space for those watching on YouTube. But yeah, I'll be back in the usual room next time. I've had to avoid the sweatbox today.
That's all right.
Good stuff.
All right. All good, my friend. All good. Have a good evening. And I hope our listeners have enjoyed it. And remember to like, share, subscribe, share this out with anyone you can think of who's maybe thinking about their blood sugar, diabetes, pre-diabetes, all that.
And search through the back episodes. We've done a few on nutrition now. We've done things about sleep and, collect them all together if you're interested in the subject. We've covered quite a lot of ground over the episodes we've done since we started the show. So have a look at the back episodes and share those as well. Good stuff. All right, Harry, I'll let you go, my friend. Good to see you.
Definitely. Take care. Bye-bye.